It was strange, dull, penetrating pain. It must have been like the pain felt by a man Garbos mentioned in a warning. Apparently this man had treacherously killed the son of an influential farmer, and the father had decided to punish the murderer in an old-fashioned manner. Together with his two cousins, the man brought the culprit to the forest. There they prepared a 12-foot stake, sharpened at one end to a fine point like a gigantic pencil. They laid it on the ground, wedging the blunt end against the tree trunk. Then a strong horse was hitched to each of the victim's feet, while his crotch was leveled with the waiting point. The horse, gently nudged, pulled the man against the spiked beam, which gradually sank into the tensed flesh. When the point was deep into the entrails of the victim, the men lifted the stake, together with the impaled man upon it, and planted it in a previously dug hole. They left him there to die, slowly. Now, hanging under the ceiling, I could almost see the man and hear him howling in the night, trying to lift the indifferent sky his arms which hung by the bloated trunk of his body. He must have looked like a bird knocked out of a tree by a slingshot and fallen flabbily into a dried-out, pointed stalk. Still feigning indifference, Judas woke up below. He yawned, scratched behind his ears, and hunted the fleas in his tail. Sometimes he glanced slyly at me, but turned away in disgust when he saw my hunched legs. He only fooled me once. I thought he had really gone to sleep and straightened out my legs. Judas instantly bounced off the floor, leaping like a grasshopper. One of my feet did not jerk up fast enough, and he tore off some of the skin at the heel. The fear and pain almost caused me to fall. Judas licked his chops triumphantly and reclined by the wall. He watched me through the slits of his eyes and waited. I thought I could not hold on any longer. I decided to jump down and planned my defense against Judas, though I knew I wouldn't even have time to lift a hand before he would be at my throat. There was no time to lose. Then suddenly I remembered the prayers. I started shifting weight from one hand to the other, moving my head, jerking my heads up and down. Judas looked at me, discouraged by this display of strength. Finally he turned towards the wall and remained motionless. Time went by and my prayers multiplied. Thousands of days of indulgence streaked through the thatched roof towards heaven. Late in the afternoon, Garbos came into the room. He looked at my wet body, at the pool of sweat on the floor. He took me off the hooks roughly and kicked the dog out. All the evening I could neither walk nor move my arms. I lay down on the mattress and prayed. Days of indulgence came in hundreds and thousands. Surely by now there was more of them in heaven for me than grains of wheat in the field. Any day, any minute, notice of this would have to be taken in heaven. Perhaps even now the saints were considering some radical improvements of my life. Garbos hung me up every day. Sometimes he did it in the morning and sometimes in the evening. And had he not been afraid of foxes and thieves and needed Judas in the yard, he would have done it at night too. It was always the same. While I still had some strength, the dog stretched out on the floor calmly, pretending to sleep or casually catching fleas. When the pain of my arms and legs began more intense, he grew alert as though sensing that he was going on inside my body. Sweat poured from me, running in rivulets over my straining muscles, hitting the floor with regular flip-flops. As soon as I straightened my legs, Judas invariably leaped at them. Months went by. Garbos needed me more around the farm because he was often drunk and did not want to work. He hung me up only when he felt he had no particular use for me. When he sobered up and heard the hungry pigs and the lowing cow, he took me off the hooks and put me to work. The muscles of my arms became conditioned by the hanging, and I could endure it for hours without much effort. Although the pain that came to my belly began later now, I got cramps which frightened me, and Judas never missed a chance to leap at me, though by now he must have doubted he would ever catch me off guard. While I hung in the straps, I concentrated on my prayers, to the exclusion of all else. When my strength ebbed, I told myself that I should be able to last another 10 or 20 prayers before I dropped down. After these were recited, I made another promise to myself of 10 or 15 prayers. I believed that something could happen at any moment, that every extra 1,000 days of indulgence could save my life. Perhaps at this very instant. Sometimes, to divert my attention from the pain and from the numb arm muscles, I teased Judas. First I swung on my arms as though I were about to fall down. The dog barked, jumped, and raged. When he went to sleep again, I would wake him with cries and the smacking of lips and grinding of teeth. He could not understand what was happening. Thinking that this was the end of my endurance, he leapt about madly, knocking into the walls in the darkness, overturning the stool standing by the door. He grunted with pain, heaved heavily, and finally rested. I took the opportunity to strengthen my legs. When the room resounded to the snoring of the fatigued beast, I saved strength by setting prizes for myself for endurance, strengthening one leg for every 1,000 days of indulgence, resting one arm for every 10 prayers, and one major shift of position for every 15 prayers. At some unexpected moment I would hear the clatter of the latch, and Garbos would enter. When he saw me alive, he would curse Judas, kick and beat him until the dog cried and whimpered like a puppy. His fury was so tremendous that I wondered if God himself had not sent him at this moment. But when I looked at his face, I could find no trace of the divine presence. I was now beaten less often. The hanging took up a lot of time, and the farm required attention. I wondered why he went on hanging me up. Did he really expect the dog to kill me, when it failed to do so all these times? After each hanging, I took a while to recover. Muscles stretched like yarn on the spinning wheel refused to retract to their normal span. I moved with difficulty. I felt like a stiff, frail stem trying to support the burden of a sunflower blossom. When I was slow at work, Garbos used to kick me and say that he would not support an idler, and threatened to send me to the German outposts. I tried to work harder than ever to convince him of my usefulness, but he was never satisfied. Whenever he got drunk, he put me in the hooks with Judas waiting patiently below. The spring of 1943 passed. I was already 10 years old, and I had accumulated who knows how many days of indulgences for each day of my life. A great church feast was approaching, and the people of the village were busy preparing festive clothes. The women made wreaths of wild thyme, sundew, linden, apple flowers, and wild carnations, which would be blessed in the church. The nave and the altars of the church were decorated with green branches of birch, poplar, and willow. After the feast, the branches would acquire great value. They would be planted in vegetable beds, in cabbage, in hemp, and flax fields, to endure rapid growth and protection against the pests. On the day of the feast, Garbos went to the church early in the morning. I remained at the farm bruised and aching from my last beating. The broken echo of tolling church bells rolled over the fields, and even Judas stopped lounging in the sun and listened. It was Corpus Christi. It was said that on this day the bodily presence of the Son of God would make itself felt in the church, and more than any other feast. Everybody went to church that day, the sinners and the righteous, those who prayed constantly and those who never prayed, the rich, the poor, the sick, and the well. But when I left alone with a dog, had no chance of achieving a better life, even though I was one of God's creatures. I made a quick decision. The store of prayers which I had accumulated could surely rival those of many younger saints. And even though they had not produced perceptible results, they must have been noticed in heaven, where justice is the law. I had nothing to fear. I started on my way to the church, walking alone the untilled strips which separated the fields from each other. The churchyard was already overflowing with unusually colorful throngs of people and their gaily decorated carts and horses. I sat in a hidden corner, waiting for an opportune moment to slip into the church by one of the side doors. Suddenly the vicar's housekeeper spotted me. One of the altar boys selected for the day had fallen sick with poisoning, she said. I had to go immediately into the vestry, change, take his place at the altar. The new priest had ordered it himself. A hot wave swept over me. I looked at the sky. At last, someone up there had noticed me. They saw my prayers lying in a huge heap like potatoes piled high at harvest time. In a moment I would be close to him, at his altar, within the protection of his vicar. This was only the beginning. From now on, a different, easier life would begin for me. I had seen the end of terror that shakes one until it squeezes the stomach empty of vomit, like a punctured poppy pod blown open by the wind. No more beatings from garbos, no more hangings, no more Judas. A new life was opening before me, a life as smooth as the yellow fields of wheat, waving under the gentle breath of the breeze. I ran to the church. It was not easy to get inside. The garish crowd overflowed around the churchyard densely. Someone noticed, and immediately drew attention to me. The peasants rushed me and began to scourge me with the osier branches and horsewhips, the older peasants laughing so hard that they had to lie down. I was dragged under a cart, then tied to the tail of a horse. I was held fast between the shafts. The horse neighed and reared and kicked me once or twice before I succeeded in freeing myself. I reached the vestry trembling, and my body ached. The priest, impatient at my delay, was ready to proceed. The magistrates had also finished dressing. I shook with nervousness as I put on the altar boy's sleeveless mantle. Whenever the priest looked away, the other boys tripped me or poked me in the back. The priest, puzzled by my slowness, became so furious that he shoved me roughly. I fell on the bench, bruised my arm. Finally, everything was ready. The doors of the vestry opened, and in the stillness of the crowded, expectant church, we took our places at the foot of the altar. 3 of us on each side of the priest. The mass proceeded in all its splendor. The priest's voice was more melodious than usual. The organ thundered with its 1,000 turbulent hearts. The altar boys carried out solemnly their meticulously incalculated functions.